The night started like any other, the dull hum of the engine a constant companion as I cruised down the desolate highway. My name's Sam. I've been a trucker for nearly 15 years, hauling goods across states, through rainstorms and snowdrifts, through sleepy towns and endless plains. This life has its own rhythm, a beat that's both comforting and isolating. But I've learned to appreciate the solitude. This particular route was new to me, a shortcut through the mountains. My dispatcher said it would save me nearly 2 hours. Sure, the road was narrow, and the nearest town was at least 50 miles away, but what could go wrong? I've driven through worse. About an hour into the drive, my CB radio crackled to life. A faint voice, distorted and hollow, whispered through the static. "Turn around. Don't take this road. Not tonight." I frowned and adjusted the dial, assuming it was some trucker playing a prank. But the voice came again, louder this time, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "Sam, you're not alone." My name. How the hell did they know my name? I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. The road ahead stretched into darkness, illuminated only by my high beams. For a moment, I considered turning back, but the thought of explaining that to my dispatcher, or worse, missing my delivery deadline, made me push forward. The radio went silent, and all I could hear was the rumble of my truck and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. That was when I noticed it, a figure standing on the shoulder, just barely within the glow of my headlights. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. His clothes were tattered, his face pale and expressionless. He raised an arm, waving at me to stop. Instinct told me to keep driving, but a trucker's code is to help when you can. Reluctantly, I pulled over, the hiss of the air brakes slicing through the stillness. "Need some help?" I called out through the window. The man didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes hollow and unblinking. A chill swept through me. Something about him felt wrong. Then, in an instant, he was gone. Gone. One moment he was standing there, and the next, the spot where he'd been was empty, as though he'd never been there at all. Panic set in. I grabbed my flashlight and jumped down from the cab, scanning the roadside. "Hey, where'd you go?" No response, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Then, the whispers started again. This time not from the radio, but from the woods. Soft, guttural murmurs that seemed to come from every direction. And then I saw them. Dozens of them, glowing faintly in the darkness, just beyond the tree-line. I bolted back to my truck, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands trembled as I fumbled to start the engine. The headlights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced on the road ahead. The whispers grew louder, morphing into guttural growls that seemed to echo inside my head. I pressed down on the accelerator, the tires screeching as I tore down the highway. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The eyes were everywhere, watching, waiting. Suddenly, a loud thud came from the roof of the cab, followed by the screech of something heavy dragging across the metal. My heart leapt into my throat as I glanced in the rearview mirror. Something was up there. The truck swayed under the weight of whatever had landed on the roof. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to keep the rig steady on the winding mountain road. "Stay calm, Sam," I whispered to myself, though my voice trembled. The sound of claws or something sharper, scraping across the metal, was unbearable. I couldn't bring myself to look in the rearview mirror again, not after the brief glimpse of that thing. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was worse. Pressed down on me, suffocating and thick. Every instinct screamed at me to stop the truck, to get out and run. But run where? I was miles from anywhere, and the darkness outside felt alive, waiting to swallow me whole. Then, a soft tapping came from the passenger side window. I jerked my head toward it, and my heart nearly stopped. A face, pale, distorted, with eyes that burned like embers, was pressed against the glass. Its mouth moved as though it were speaking, but no sound came out. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if it wanted in. "Nope. Hell no," I muttered, slamming my foot on the gas. The truck roared forward, tires skidding slightly on the narrow road. The figure disappeared from the window, but the scraping on the roof intensified. It sounded like it was trying to tear its way inside. My mind raced. I needed a plan, a weapon, something. My eyes darted to the glove compartment where I kept an old revolver. I reached for it, my hand trembling, when the truck's headlights caught something up ahead. A woman stood in the middle of the road, waving her arms frantically. "Not again," I muttered, slamming on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop, the rear trailer fishtailing slightly. I stared at the woman, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She looked normal, disheveled, maybe, but human. She ran to my door, banging on it with both fists. "Please, let me in. It's coming." I hesitated. My instincts told me not to trust her, but the sheer terror in her voice made me reach for the door handle. Before I could open it, a deafening roar echoed through the night, so loud it rattled the windows. The woman froze, her eyes widening in horror. "It's here!" she screamed. Before I could react, something massive slammed into the truck. The impact was so forceful it tipped the cab slightly, throwing me against the door. The woman was gone, snatched so quickly I barely saw what happened. All that remained was a trail of blood leading into the woods. I grabbed the revolver, throwing the door open and stepping out into the night. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to stand. The wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of decay. "Show yourself," I yelled, the gun shaking in my hand. The forest fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the shadows, it emerged. It was enormous, hunched over on all fours with limbs too long and too thin. Its skin was mottled, gray and leathery, stretched tight over its skeletal frame. The eyes, those burning eyes, locked onto me, and it smiled. The smile was worse than anything else, jagged teeth glinting in the faint moonlight. It didn't move, just stared, as though it were waiting for me to make the first move. I raised the revolver and fired. The first shot hit its shoulder, but it didn't even flinch. I fired again, aiming for its head. This time, it let out a low growl, but instead of charging, it retreated, melting back into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I stood there, panting, the gun still aimed at where it had been. A sudden realization hit me. The scraping on the roof was gone. Whatever had been up there was now inside the cab. I turned slowly, the blood draining from my face. Through the windshield, I saw it, sitting in the driver's seat, staring back at me with that same twisted grin. It raised one bony hand and waved. My blood ran cold as the thing in the driver's seat tilted its head, mimicking the motion of a curious animal. The grin never faltered, stretching impossibly wide across its skeletal face. Its long fingers tapped rhythmically against the steering wheel, as if mocking me. I took a step back, the revolver still in my shaking hand. My mind screamed at me to run, but where? The forest was alive with the memory of those glowing eyes, and the highway stretched on into an abyss of darkness. "Get out of my truck," I growled, trying to sound braver than I felt. The creature's head snapped upright, its smile vanishing in an instant. For a moment, it sat still, as if considering my words. Then, with a speed that defied logic, it slammed its hand down on the horn. The sound blared through the night, deafening and distorted, as if the air itself was screaming. I fired the revolver through the windshield. The glass shattered, and for a split second, I thought I'd hit it. But when the smoke cleared, the seat was empty. My heart pounded as I backed away, scanning the road and the surrounding woods. I spun around, expecting to see it towering over me, but there was nothing. The air felt heavier now, like the world was holding its breath. The silence was broken by the sound of the truck's engine revving. I turned just in time to see the headlights flicker to life, the beams casting long, jagged shadows across the trees. The truck lurched forward, its massive wheels screeching against the asphalt. I dove to the side as the rig roared past me, narrowly avoiding being crushed under the tires. It barreled down the highway, swerving wildly before disappearing around a bend. For a moment, I lay there in the gravel, trying to process what had just happened. My truck, my lifeline, my home on the road was gone. And with it, any chance of getting out of this nightmare. A low growl rumbled from the woods, snapping me out of my daze. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the revolver tightly. The growl grew louder, closer, reverberating through the trees. It wasn't alone this time. The whispers returned, layered over the growls, forming a sickening symphony that made my skin crawl. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just ran, my boots pounding against the cracked asphalt. The whispers followed, growing louder with every step, until they were all I could hear. The road twisted and turned, the darkness swallowing everything beyond a few feet ahead. My legs burned. My lungs screamed for air, but I couldn't stop. Not until I saw it. An old diner, its neon sign flickering weakly in the distance. Hope surged through me, a place to hide, maybe even a phone to call for help. I sprinted toward the light, ignoring the shadows that flickered in the corners of my vision. The diner's door creaked as I shoved it open, the bell above jingling weakly. Inside, it was eerily quiet. The tables were empty, the chairs neatly tucked in. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the counter, steam still rising from the surface. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No response. I moved toward the counter, my eyes scanning every corner of the room. Behind the counter, a payphone hung on the wall. I rushed to it, grabbing the receiver with trembling hands. The dial tone buzzed faintly in my ear as I punched in 911. Nothing. I slammed the receiver down, panic rising in my chest. That's when I noticed the mirror behind the counter. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, but it wasn't alone. Behind me, just out of reach, stood the creature. Its grin was back, wider than ever, and its eyes burned like twin embers in the gloom. I spun around, the revolver raised, but the diner was empty. A chill ran down my spine as I turned back to the mirror. The creature was still there, closer now, its bony fingers reaching for my shoulder. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I bolted for the door, shoving it open and stumbling back onto the highway. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices overlapping and echoing through the night. And then I saw it. My truck, parked in the middle of the road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver's door hung open, swinging gently in the breeze. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to run the other way. But something, maybe desperation, maybe stupidity, pulled me toward it. I climbed into the cab, slamming the door behind me. The engine purred softly, as if nothing had happened. I gripped the wheel, my hands trembling, and whispered a silent prayer as I pressed down on the gas. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty. But in the rearview mirror, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, standing in the middle of the highway, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They didn't follow. They didn't need to, because as I drove, the whispers didn't fade. They grew louder. The truck's cab felt like a coffin. The walls seemed to close in with every passing mile, the whispers clawing at the edges of my sanity. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, my eyes darting between the endless road ahead and the rearview mirror. The figures were gone, swallowed by the darkness, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The whispers weren't just noise anymore. They were words, fragmented sentences that teased the edges of comprehension. "Keep driving. Almost there. He's waiting." I wanted to stop, to pull over and collect my thoughts, but something in me knew that stopping would be a mistake. The highway was alive, its lines stretching endlessly into a void that seemed to have no destination. A sign loomed ahead, its text illuminated by my headlights. "Welcome to Black Hollow, population 0. I blinked, certain I'd misread it, but as I passed the sign, the words burned into my memory, and a cold dread settled over me. I had never heard of Black Hollow, and the thought of entering a town with no population filled me with a primal fear I couldn't explain. Still, I pressed on, the road narrowing as the trees closed in on either side. The whispers grew more insistent, like a chorus urging me forward. And then the headlights revealed something that made my stomach drop. Another truck was parked across the road, its trailer jackknifed at an odd angle. The cab door hung open, swaying gently in the wind. I slowed to a crawl, my pulse racing. The truck was identical to mine, same make, same color, even the same license plate. "What the hell?" I muttered, pulling to a stop a few feet away. The whispers fell silent, replaced by an oppressive, suffocating quiet. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out, my boots crunching against the gravel. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of diesel and something metallic. Blood. The truck's cab was empty, but the driver's seat was soaked in blood, the leather torn and gouged as if something had clawed its way inside. I backed away, my stomach churning, and that's when I saw it. A man, or what was left of him, was sprawled in the ditch beside the road. His body was twisted, broken in ways that didn't seem possible. His face was frozen in a mask of terror, his eyes wide and staring at something I couldn't see. "Jesus?" I whispered, stumbling back toward my truck. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But as I reached the cab, I froze. Someone was sitting in the passenger seat. It wasn't the creature. It was a man, tall, thin, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes. He wore a battered trucker's cap, and his hands rested calmly on his knees as he stared straight ahead. I didn't ask how he'd gotten there. I didn't ask who he was. I just climbed into the driver's seat, my revolver resting on my lap, and started the engine. "You're heading the wrong way," the man said, his voice low and raspy. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "How did you get in here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to me, his eyes hollow and dark. "Turn around, Sam. This road doesn't end." I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. "How do you know my name?" I shouted, turning to face him. But the passenger seat was empty. The man was gone. I sat there, breathing hard, my hands trembling on the wheel. The whispers returned, louder now, screaming in a language I didn't understand. The air in the cab grew cold, frost creeping across the windshield. And then I heard it, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, coming from outside the truck. I turned toward the window, my breath fogging up the glass. The creature stood there, its burning eyes locked on mine. It raised one hand, pressing its long, clawed fingers against the window. "Drive," it whispered, its voice echoing inside my head. "There's no escape, Sam. Only the road." I didn't hesitate. I slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator. The tires screeched as the truck surged forward, the creature disappearing into the darkness behind me. The road stretched on, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. Time lost all meaning. The world outside the cab was a blur, a shifting landscape of shadows and shapes that seemed to move on their own. And then, up ahead, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, waving its arms. As I got closer, my heart sank. It was me. The man in the road was an exact copy of me, down to the blood-stained shirt and wild, terrified eyes. He stood motionless, staring as the truck barreled toward him. I slammed on the brakes, but the truck didn't stop. The last thing I saw before the impact was my own face, twisted in a scream. The cab filled with light, a blinding, searing light that swallowed everything. The whispers faded, replaced by a deafening silence. And then, just as suddenly, the light was gone. I was back on the highway, the truck cruising smoothly, the road ahead bathed in the soft glow of the headlights. The whispers were gone. The radio crackled faintly, playing a song I didn't recognize. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those burning eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the empty road, stretching endlessly into the night. I drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the oppressive quiet. The road felt different now, its surface smoother, almost unnatural. The air in the cab was heavy, like the weight of the darkness outside had seeped in, pressing against my chest. Something wasn't right. I'd been driving for hours, at least it felt like hours, but the scenery hadn't changed. No exits, no signs, Not even a mile marker. Just the same endless stretch of asphalt, flanked by trees that seemed to twist and writhe in the periphery of my vision. Then I saw it. A light in the distance. At first, I thought it was a mirage, some trick of my overworked mind. But as I got closer, the glow resolved into a neon sign flickering weakly against the night. Last Stop Diner. It was the same diner I'd seen earlier, or at least it looked like it. The same cracked parking lot, the same peeling paint on the walls. But something about it felt wrong. The light from the sign didn't just illuminate. It pulsed, casting shadows that moved unnaturally, as if alive. I didn't want to stop, but the truck had other ideas. The engine sputtered and died, the headlights flickering out. The cab fell into darkness, leaving me alone with my pounding heart. "No," I muttered, turning the key in the ignition. The engine groaned but refused to start. "Come on." "Not now." I glanced toward the diner. The lights inside flickered, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw movement. A shadow passing by the window. My skin prickled with unease. Grabbing my flashlight and the revolver, I climbed out of the cab. The air was colder than before, biting at my skin as I approached the diner. Each step felt heavier, as though the ground itself was trying to pull me down. The bell above the door jingled weakly as I stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and something metallic. Blood, maybe. The tables were empty, just like before, but now the half-finished cup of coffee on the counter was gone. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing through the empty space. No answer. I moved toward the counter, my boots sticking slightly to the floor. The mirror behind the counter was cracked now, spiderweb fractures distorting my reflection. As I stared at it, my reflection didn't move. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. My reflection tilted its head, its mouth curling into a grin that didn't belong to me. "You shouldn't have stopped," it whispered, its voice a perfect mimicry of mine. The lights flickered, and the room seemed to shift around me. The tables and chairs were gone, replaced by rows of something. I turned slowly, my stomach lurching as I realized what they were. Bodies, dozens of them, lined up against the walls, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Their eyes were open, staring blankly at nothing. A low growl echoed through the room, and I spun around, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The creature was there, crouched on the counter, its burning eyes locked onto mine. "You can't leave, Sam," it rasped, its voice reverberating inside my skull. "The road brought you here for a reason." I raised the revolver, my finger trembling on the trigger. "Stay back," I shouted, tilted its head, amused. "Do you think that will save you?" Before I could respond, it lunged. I fired, the gunshot deafening in the confined space. The bullet hit its mark, but the creature barely flinched. It was on me in an instant, its claws slamming into my chest and pinning me to the floor. The air left my lungs as its face hovered inches from mine. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "This isn't about you," it hissed. "You're just another traveler, another story for the road." Its claws dug deeper, and I screamed, the pain blinding. The room spun, the walls dissolving into shadows that seemed to consume everything. And then, just as quickly as it began, it stopped. I was back in the cab of my truck, the engine purring softly. The road stretched ahead, bathed in the soft glow of the headlights. My chest ached, and when I looked down, there were no wounds, but I could still feel the phantom pressure of the creature's claws. The whispers were gone. The air felt normal. For a moment, I thought it was over, but as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart sank. The diner was there, glowing faintly in the distance. No matter how far I drove, it never disappeared. And then I saw them, the figures from the road, standing in the shadows at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I knew, deep down, that I'd never really left. The road wasn't a way out. It was a trap, and I was its newest prisoner. I don't know how long I've been driving. Days? Weeks? Time doesn't work the same way on this road. Every mile feels like a lifetime, Yet I'm trapped in the same stretch, the same twisted reality where nothing changes, but nothing stays still, either. The diner still haunts me. No matter how far I drive, it reappears like a mirage in the distance, its neon sign flickering, daring me to stop again. I won't. I can't. Not after what I saw inside. But the whispers have returned. Softer now, almost like a lullaby, weaving through my mind, pulling at the edges of my sanity. Sometimes they sound like my own voice. Sometimes they sound like hers, the woman from the road, the one who screamed before she vanished into the darkness. Other times, they don't sound human at all. Tonight, the road feels different. The shadows are thicker, heavier. My headlights barely penetrate the darkness. The beams swallowed whole as if the night itself is alive. And then, up ahead, I see it. A car. It's sitting in the middle of the highway, its hazard lights flashing weakly. I slow down, my heart racing. I know better than to stop, but something feels off. The car looks familiar. Too familiar. As I pull closer, my stomach drops. It's my car, or at least it's the car I used to drive before I became a trucker. The paint's the same shade of midnight blue. The bumper still has the dent from that time I hit a mailbox in Ohio. Even the license plate matches. I stop the truck, my hands shaking as I reach for the revolver. I don't know what I'm expecting to find, but I can't leave without looking. I climb out, the flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the suffocating darkness. The car is empty. The driver's door is open, swinging gently in the breeze. The interior smells like it always did, leather and cheap cologne. On the passenger seat, I see something that makes my blood run cold. It's a photograph, a Polaroid, slightly faded, of me and my sister, Emma, taken at a rest stop years ago. I pick it up with trembling fingers, my mind racing. Emma died 5 years ago in a car accident. She wasn't supposed to be on that road, but she was running from something just like me. I hear a sound behind me. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I spin around, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Emma, I whisper, my voice barely audible. She steps out of the shadows, her face pale and expressionless. She looks exactly as I remember, down to the scar on her cheek from a childhood bike accident. But her eyes are wrong. Dark and empty like two endless voids. Sam, she says, her voice hollow. Why didn't you save me? I back away, my heart pounding. You're not real. You're not her. She tilts her head, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Aren't I? Or is this just another road you didn't take? Behind her, the shadows shift. Figures emerge, their faces indistinct but familiar. People I've lost. People I've failed. They stare at me, their mouths moving silently, as if accusing me of something I can't remember. I stumble backward, dropping the flashlight. The beam cuts across the pavement, illuminating the edges of a vast chasm where the road should be. The highway doesn't end. It's been broken, split open into a void that stretches endlessly into the abyss. Emma takes a step closer. The others follow, their movements jerky and unnatural. Stay back, I shout, raising the revolver. My voice echoes hollow and weak. They don't stop. The whispers return, louder now, a deafening chorus that drowns out my thoughts. The figures surround me, their hands reaching out, their faces melting into something monstrous. The flashlight flickers and dies, plunging me into darkness. I wake up in the truck, my head pounding, the whispers gone. The road stretches ahead, as if nothing happened. But something's different. In the passenger seat, the photograph of me and Emma sits neatly on the dashboard. And in the rearview mirror, I see her, sitting in the back of the cab, her dark, empty eyes staring at me. My chest tightened as I stared into the rearview mirror. Emma, or the thing wearing her face, sat perfectly still in the back of the cab. Her eyes, black as coal, locked onto mine. I wanted to look away, to pretend she wasn't there, but I couldn't. It was like those eyes were pulling me in, dragging me deeper into the nightmare. You don't belong here, I said, my voice shaky. It was the only thing I could think to say. The revolver sat on the passenger seat, just out of reach, but I doubted it would help. She didn't respond. She just tilted her head slightly, her dark hair falling across her face in a way that reminded me of the real Emma. For a brief, painful moment, I let myself believe it was her, that somehow she'd found her way back. "Sam," she finally said, her voice soft but wrong, like two voices layered on top of each other. "You left me. Why did you leave me?" "I didn't leave you," I snapped, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. It wasn't my fault, Emma. It wasn't my fault." Her smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too perfect. "No, it wasn't your fault. But that doesn't mean you're forgiven." I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a stop in the middle of the empty highway. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of the engine. When I turned around to face her, the back of the cab was empty. "God damn it," I muttered, rubbing a hand over my face. I was losing it. This road, this place, it was breaking me piece by piece. But then I saw it. A handprint, smudged and dark, like oil or ash, pressed against the inside of the windshield. And next to it, words scrawled in the same dark substance. "You can't drive away." I didn't remember starting the truck again, but somehow I was driving. The whispers returned, faint and distant, like a radio station just out of range. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the horizon shifting and shimmering like a mirage. And then I saw the first one. A figure stepped out of the darkness, standing motionless in the center of the highway. A man, dressed in tattered clothes, his face pale and blank. I swerved to avoid him, my tires skidding on the asphalt. Then there was another, and another. They appeared one by one, lining the sides of the road like sentinels. Men, women, children, all of them silent, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. They just watched as I passed. My hands trembled on the wheel. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Ahead, the road curved sharply, and standing at the bend, waiting, was the diner. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Not again." The truck slowed, almost as if it had a mind of its own. I fought the wheel, pressing down on the gas, but it was no use. The diner loomed closer, its neon sign flickering. "Last stop." The figures were there, too, crowding the parking lot, their faces turned toward me. Among them, I saw her, Emma. She stood near the door, her eyes as empty as the others, her hand outstretched as if beckoning me. The truck came to a stop on its own, the engine falling silent. I sat there, paralyzed, my breath fogging up the glass. The revolver was still on the seat beside me, but it felt useless now. This wasn't something I could fight, not with bullets. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling. The air outside was thick, almost suffocating. As I stepped out onto the cracked asphalt, the figures didn't move. They just watched, their eyes burning into me. Emma was still by the door, waiting. "You shouldn't be here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You brought us here," she replied, her voice echoing like a distant memory. "You've always been on this road, Sam. Don't you see?" I shook my head, backing away. No, this isn't real. None of this is real." She took a step closer, her hand still outstretched. "Come inside, Sam. It's time to remember." The whispers surged, louder now, drowning out my thoughts. The neon sign above the diner flickered violently, casting strange, twisted shadows across the lot. And then the door opened, spilling golden light onto the pavement. I don't remember walking through the door, but somehow I was inside. The diner was different now. The tables were gone, replaced by rows of mirrors lining the walls. Each one reflected a version of me. Some older, some younger, some scarred and bloodied. Emma stood in the center of the room, her eyes locked on mine. Behind her, the creature crouched, its grin wider than ever. "This is the last stop," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "The place where all your roads end." The mirrors began to ripple, the reflections shifting. In each one, I saw something different, memories I'd buried, choices I'd made, paths I didn't take, the accident, Emma's death, the road, the whispers crescendoed, a deafening roar that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Make a choice, Sam," the creature rasped, its voice like shattered glass. "Stay on the road or step into the light." I looked at Emma, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." She smiled, and for the first time it felt real. The mirrors shattered, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the truck. The cab was still, the engine silent. The highway stretched ahead, bathed in an unnatural gray light, as if the sun was stuck just below the horizon. I blinked, disoriented, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. The mirrors were gone. The diner was gone. But Emma's voice lingered, soft and distant, like a melody I couldn't shake. "Make a choice, Sam." I didn't know what she meant. Wasn't I already living the choice? Stuck on this endless road, haunted by whispers and shadows that refused to let me go? I reached for the revolver, my fingers brushing against its cold metal. But as I lifted it, I noticed something on the dashboard that hadn't been there before. A map. Its edges were tattered, the paper yellowed with age, but the markings on it were fresh, 2 lines diverging from a single point, like a fork in the road. I leaned closer, squinting at the small, handwritten note scrawled in the corner. "One leads home, one leads to the end. Choose wisely." The cab grew colder, the whispers returning in faint bursts, almost like laughter. I looked up, and there it was, the fork in the road. The highway split into 2 paths, each one disappearing into the thick, gray fog. The left road looked smoother, its lines freshly painted, the asphalt gleaming as if it had been newly laid. The right road was cracked and overgrown, its surface littered with debris. The trees lining it were twisted, their branches reaching out like claws. I slammed the map down and stared at the roads ahead. "This is a trick," I muttered. "There's no way off this damn highway." But the map's warning echoed in my mind. One leads home, one leads to the end. I sat there for what felt like hours, the truck idling softly. The smooth road called to me, promising relief, escape, maybe even salvation. But the overgrown path, there was something about it. Pull I couldn't explain. Felt familiar. The whispers grew louder, urging me to move. They didn't tell me which road to take. They just wanted me to choose. Finally, with my heart pounding in my chest, I turned the wheel toward the overgrown path. The truck groaned as it rolled onto the cracked asphalt, the tires crunching over debris. The fog thickened, swallowing the road behind me. It felt like I was driving through a tunnel, the trees on either side forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. The whispers faded, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from the road itself. The farther I drove, the darker it became, the headlights barely piercing the gloom. And then, just as I was starting to doubt my choice, the truck jerked violently. I slammed on the brakes, gripping the wheel as the cab shuddered to a stop. The hum had stopped, replaced by silence so complete it felt oppressive. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield. There, in the middle of the road, stood a man. His back was to me, his figure barely illuminated by the headlights. He was tall, his clothes tattered and stained, his head tilted slightly as if listening for something. I grabbed the revolver and stepped out of the truck, my boots crunching against the broken asphalt. "Hey!" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "You need help." The man didn't move. I took a cautious step forward, the gun raised. I said, Before I could finish, he turned. It wasn't a man. Its face was wrong. The features stretched and distorted. Its mouth too wide, filled with teeth that didn't belong. Its eyes burned like embers, locking onto me with an intensity that froze me in place. "You chose poorly," it rasped, its voice a guttural snarl that seemed to vibrate in my chest. It lunged. I fired, the shot deafening in the quiet. The bullet hit its mark, but the creature didn't stop. It was on me in an instant, its claws slamming into my chest, pinning me to the ground. Pain exploded through me as its face hovered inches from mine, its breath hot and rancid. "You cannot escape," it hissed. "This road is yours. Forever." With a surge of adrenaline, I swung the revolver, striking it across the head. It howled, the sound inhuman, and for a moment, its grip loosened. I scrambled to my feet, firing again and again until the chamber clicked empty. The creature staggered back, its body twisting and writhing as if trying to hold itself together. Black smoke poured from its wounds, and with a final, ear-splitting shriek, it dissolved into the air. I stumbled back to the truck, my chest heaving, blood seeping through my shirt where its claws had torn into me. The road ahead was still dark, the fog thicker than ever. But there was something new in the distance, a faint, golden light. With shaking hands, I climbed into the cab and started the engine. The truck rumbled to life, and I pressed down on the accelerator, the wheels spinning on the broken asphalt before catching. The light grew brighter as I drove, piercing through the fog. I didn't know where it led, but it was better than the darkness behind me. As I approached, the light began to take shape. It wasn't an exit. It wasn't home. It was another diner. The neon sign flickered as I pulled into the lot, my heart sinking. The words glowed faintly against the dark. "Last stop." And standing at the door, waiting for me, was Emma. The diner loomed in the fog, its neon sign sputtering weakly. "Last stop." The words pulsed like a heartbeat, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. I sat frozen in the cab, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I stared at Emma. She stood by the door, her face as still as a photograph. Her eyes, those endless, black voids, bored into me, pulling at something deep and primal. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just waited. The truck engine idled, its rhythmic hum the only sound in the suffocating silence. I could feel the revolver on the seat beside me, cold and heavy, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Not here. Not against her. I couldn't stay in the truck forever. I knew that, whatever this place was, it wouldn't let me go until I stepped inside. With a deep, shuddering breath, I grabbed the revolver and climbed out. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of rain and something metallic. Blood. Maybe. My boots crunched against the gravel as I approached the diner, each step feeling like a sentence in a book I didn't want to finish. "Emma," I called out, my voice hoarse. "If this is you, if you're really here." She didn't respond. Her lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't comforting. It was a smile that didn't belong to her. When I reached the door, she turned and walked inside. The bell jingled softly as the door swung shut behind her. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. A voice whispered in the back of my mind, faint but insistent, "Don't go in." But I had no choice. The door creaked as I stepped inside. The air was warmer, the smell of burnt coffee and stale grease hitting me like a wall. The diner looked the same as before. Rows of empty tables, the counter lined with stools, the mirror behind it cracked and distorted. But now there was something new. A single table in the center of the room, bathed in a soft, golden light. Emma sat there, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Across from her, a second chair waited, empty. She gestured toward it, her smile widening. "Sit, Sam," she said, her voice softer now, almost kind. "We've got a lot to talk about." My legs felt like lead as I approached the table. The revolver hung loosely in my hand, but she didn't seem to care. I sat down, my heart hammering in my chest. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's happening to me?" Her smile faltered, just for a moment. "This place is you, Sam. Every mile, every turn, every shadow on the road. It's all yours." "That doesn't make sense," I snapped, frustration and fear bubbling over. "I didn't choose this. I don't want any of this." Her expression softened, and for the first time, she looked like the Emma I remembered. "You didn't choose it, Sam, but you can't run from it either. This road, this diner, it's all the same. It's where your choices led you." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't—" "You left me," she interrupted, her voice sharp now. You let me go when I needed you the most. You didn't even try to save me. Tears welled up in my eyes. Emma, I didn't know how. I wasn't there when it happened. That's the problem, isn't it? She said, leaning forward. Her eyes burned now, the black voids swirling like storm clouds. You were never there. For me. For anyone. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but deep down, I knew she was right. I had spent my life running. From responsibility, from pain, from the things that mattered most. And now the road had caught up to me. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely audible. She leaned back, her smile returning. That's up to you. You can keep driving, keep running, and let the road take you wherever it wants. Or, she gestured to the cracked mirror behind the counter, you can face it. All of it. The mirror shimmered, its fractured surface rippling like water. Through the cracks, I saw flashes of memories. Moments I tried to forget. Emma's accident. The fights with my parents. The people I'd hurt along the way. They played out like scenes from a film, each one more painful than the last. I turned back to her, tears streaming down my face. And if I face it, her smile faded. Then maybe, just maybe, you'll find your way off this road. The room grew darker, the golden light around the table dimming. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing from every corner of the diner. Choose Sam, Emma said, her voice cutting through the noise. Stay on the road or face the truth. I looked at the revolver in my hand, then at the mirror. My reflection stared back, hollow and broken. The road outside stretched into the void, endless and empty. For the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid. Not of the road, not of the whispers, not even of the truth. I stood, walking toward the mirror, the whispers growing louder with every step. The reflection shifted, warping and twisting, but I didn't look away. When I reached the mirror, I raised the revolver, and I fired. The sound echoed through the diner, shattering the silence. The mirror exploded into shards of light, and the whispers stopped. The diner dissolved around me, the walls crumbling into ash, the floor giving way beneath my feet. I fell weightless and free into the void, and then I woke up. I was in the truck, parked on the side of a quiet highway. The morning sun was rising, its light warm and golden. The air smelled fresh, clean, like rain after a storm. The road stretched ahead, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't endless anymore. There were mile markers, exits, a way forward. The whispers were gone. And in the passenger seat where the revolver used to be was Emma's photograph. She was smiling. The sunrise spilled golden light across the highway, painting the road ahead in hues of warmth I hadn't seen in what felt like an eternity. For the first time, the air felt alive, crisp and clean, carrying the scent of earth and possibility. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady now, the tremors of fear and uncertainty replaced by something unfamiliar. Peace. Emma's photograph lay on the passenger seat. Her smile was genuine, untouched by the void that had haunted me for so long. I picked it up, tracing the edges with my thumb. The memories it held didn't hurt anymore. They felt lighter, like the burden had finally been lifted. The highway wasn't endless anymore. I could see it stretching ahead, winding its way toward a horizon dotted with trees and distant mountains. Signs of life emerged. Mile markers, distant farmhouses, the occasional car passing in the opposite direction. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The first town I reached was small, tucked between rolling hills and dense forests. Its streets were quiet but welcoming, the kind of place where time seemed to move just a little slower. I parked the truck by a diner. Not the same one, thank God, and stepped out. The sun warmed my face, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon greeted me. The bell above the door jingled, and a waitress with kind eyes and a warm smile approached me. "Long night on the road?" she asked, pouring coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. "You have no idea," I said, my voice lighter than I expected. She laughed, and it was a sound so ordinary, so human, that it nearly brought tears to my eyes. I sat there for a while, letting the hum of the diner ground me. The whispers were gone, the shadows banished. All that remained was the simple, quiet rhythm of life. Back on the road, I passed more towns, more signs of the world I thought I'd lost. The map from the truck's dashboard had disappeared, but I didn't need it. Something inside me knew where I was going. As the hours passed, memories returned. Not the haunting flashes of regret, but the good ones. Emma and I as kids riding our bikes through the neighborhood. The family road trips, the laughter, the way she used to stick her head out of the car window to feel the wind. Those moments had been buried under years of guilt and grief, but now they shone through, vibrant and real. I reached the outskirts of my hometown just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. The streets were familiar, though some things had changed. A new gas station here, a repainted storefront there, but it still felt like home. I parked the truck outside the house I hadn't seen in years. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow over the front steps. I sat there for a moment, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. My hands gripped the steering wheel one last time. Then I stepped out. The front door opened before I reached it, and my mother stood there, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then her expression softened, and she stepped forward, pulling me into a hug. "Sam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're home." That night, as I lay in my childhood bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar creaks of the house settling. The road was behind me now. The whispers, the shadows, the endless loops of fear and regret. They were gone. I reached over to the nightstand, picking up Emma's photograph. Her smile seemed brighter now, more real. I set it down gently, closing my eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, I slept without fear. The road would always be a part of me. It had shown me my demons, forced me to confront the truth I'd been running from for so long. But it had also shown me the way out, the path forward. The journey wasn't over. It never really is. But for the first time, I was ready to face it. I was free.